Thank you everyone for being here. I know all of our time is valuable. This is an incredibly important discussion. Our office has had many conversations with individual constituents, with DPW, with the Safe and Healthy Streets. And our goal for this meeting is to kind of catch everyone up to where we all are sharing the same information and hear a little bit of the background of data on the street, work that DPW has done, and then what some possible options are to make this intersection as well as this street safer. So with that, Andy, would you like to introduce yourself and kick us off for this discussion?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Andy Bano, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm your neighbor down the street from this intersection on Floyd Avenue. I used to be, a few years back, about 4 blocks probably from Robinson and Kensington. So um, I was going to say happy to see you all, but I can't see any of you. But happy to chat with you. I am the Transportation Engineering Program Manager for the City of Richmond, which is just jargon for I'm part of the team that's working to make streets great for walking and riding bikes and taking the bus and just getting around however we need to get around. Um, do you want me, should I go ahead and give up some background? Okay. Um, so um, give a little context about what Public Works does just generally. I find this would be it's generally helpful for any project specific conversation, even if we're not talking about a humongous program, but one particular intersection. When we say that Richmond is a Vision Zero city and a complete street city, some of you, if you're in a meeting like this, you might be familiar with those terms. If you're not, it just basically means from complete streets is that you're able to get around the city by any mode. So you might walk, you might be in a wheelchair, you might ride a bicycle, you might choose to ride the bus, you might drive a car. But complete streets means that throughout the city, that there is a network that serves you, however young or old you are, and whatever your abilities might be, that the streets serve you. And the second thing, which is super important, is Vision Zero City. And that is simply that no loss of life is acceptable in traffic. And so Vision Zero started in Sweden, and it's this effort to eliminate traffic crashes that involve severe injuries and fatalities. And another way, a kind of simple way of describing those is just it's life-altering crashes. I mean, these are the ones where even if you survive, but you're in the hospital for a long period of time, it not only changes your life, but it changes lives of people around you. These are very dramatic events. And that is where our work in the Transportation Engineering Division has to be focused because, again, we say that no loss of life is acceptable. What you might be seeing on the screen right now that shows a bunch of dots, and then underneath those dots are some red lines. The red lines indicate the high injury network in Richmond, and that's basically 9% of our city streets where the vast majority, about 76% of our life-altering crashes happen on just 9% of the streets. So that's those red lines. And then when you see those dots there, the orange or yellow dots are severe injury crashes, and the red dots are fatal crashes. So when we approach this kind of work, even though we're transportation professionals, we have a deliberate focus on our culture as a whole. So whenever we're talking about ways to keep people safe and prevent crashes before they happen, we're talking with family members, we're talking with neighbors like you folks tonight, talking with kids at schools, teachers, principals, places of worship, just wherever people are, encouraging others to talk about ways to keep people safe on our streets. One way that we do this that's a very unengineering way, but very effective, is the simple reminder that the human body is fragile. We know that people will make mistakes that lead to crashes, which is why our public space has to have layers of protection. And so you might hear terms like safe systems approach, and that means things like we need safe vehicle design, we need safe road design, we need safe vehicle operation. One thing that we talk a lot about is crash energy. I've told this to many people over the years that when I was studying engineering, physics class nearly killed me. And it turns out years later, I end up talking about physics, kinetic energy or crash energy, which is the killer formula is 1/2 times mass times velocity squared. And that's a formula that I look at a lot and remind people of a lot, because what it means is a little bit of increase in a driver's speed means a whole lot more trouble when there is a crash. And so we know that the behavior that is causing the most damage to people is coming from drivers. And so from the public works point of view, when we're doing messaging, with whether it's at conferences with other engineers or it's locally, we're focused on that primary source of danger, the person behind the wheel. We're saying things like slow down, stop at red lights, put your phone down, slow down, be sober when you're driving. Just all these kinds of things that go towards the driver, because again, we know mistakes happen, but when a mistake happens, we want it to be scrapes and bruises, not life-altering crashes. Another thing that we talk a lot about is related to speed is the older a person gets, the more frail their body is, and the higher the probability of death is. That's of course very important on a city street where we want a grid to have to serve people of all ages and abilities. We want young folks and old folks to be able to get around. What's one more stat that I wanted to share with you that comes from, I can't remember if it's AAA's Virginia office or if it's Virginia DMV. But let's see, where's this? Let me find this number that I had saved. We track these kinds of things about how the dramatic before and after of crashes, depending on speed. Here we go. If a person walking is hit by a car at 23 miles per hour, they have a 90% chance of survival. If a person is hit at 50 miles per hour, they only have a 25% chance of survival. It goes even higher. I mean, 58 miles an hour, and like not even driving 60 miles an hour. If you get hit as a pedestrian, you only have a 10% survival rate. So that keeping speeds under 25 miles an hour is so important. And it goes back to our constant messaging, our drumbeat of slow down, everybody. And as one thing we remind people of is we're a city. We're not sprawled out that big. And for the most part, our streets are about 25 miles an hour. So this is all background to say everything that we're doing with the Public Works Transportation Engineering Division has to do with slowing people and cars down so that everybody else can thrive and survive on city streets. And then as far as very particular types of projects that we're working on, and then I'll tie this to Robinson Street corridor. We measure our work in fiscal years, and from the fiscal year 2017 to fiscal year 2024, the city won almost $700 million just to fund Vision Zero projects. So these are projects that have a direct connection to, if you modify this thing, then people will survive. It will prevent crashes. It will reduce speed, all that sort of thing, Vision Zero. And then from fiscal year 2017 to fiscal year 2027, we have almost $50 million just in pedestrian safety project funding. So this is something that's been ongoing for several years, that looking at streets, how can they be improved, both for people walking and rolling, but then also how can they be improved in a way that slows down drivers, helps them behave better behind the wheel. Some of the projects that we do, but and then Sven, you can bring up the Robinson Street is pedestrian hybrid beacons, signal equipment upgrades, leading pedestrian intervals, which are you might have seen some of these on Broad Street or some of the other busy streets where you get a head start before cars get a green light. Countdown signals, transit priority timing, which basically means the bus is going to have a good go of it down the busy streets. Speed tables, I forget the exact number. I want to say it was something like 260 last year. Curb extensions, accessible ramps, speed, we call them safety cameras, but cameras for speed and red light running, which is something that RPD, Richmond Police Department, is overseeing. Working with crossing guards in the planning department, working with them with their parking reform and zoning reform. All these sorts of things are the kinds of projects that we're involved in routinely to make streets safer. And then here on the Robinson, let me make my screen larger so I can see the corridor. This on the right-hand side where you see this list of projects, this is in that same vein of how do we protect our most vulnerable users, which is people that are outside of a motor vehicle. It's projects like this. So starting at the top, Robinson Street streetscape from Carey Street to Broad. It's something that has what that jargon PROAG is, has to deal with pedestrians out in the public right of way. And it's things like accessible curb ramps and curb cuts, that sort of thing. Getting rid of old, outdated poles that aren't necessary. You all are very familiar with all those wires that are up in the sky from the old streetcar days. There's just a lot of stuff that's up there. And so this project is about the streetscape, not just lanes themselves, but all the things around it. Transit infrastructure being things like benches and other street furniture that just makes it comfortable and inviting. Trees and lights are a big part of streetscape projects. Carey Street and Robinson, left turn hardening is one of my favorite things to tell people about that most people don't know about. It is sometimes referred to as left turn calming. And basically what this treatment does, it's a very simple, you can barely notice it if you're out in the street. Just if you were to stand on a corner, you would barely notice it. But think of a low rise speed bump that's out in the street that if you're driving and you approach an intersection, you need to go all the way to the end of the speed bump and turn left instead of just swinging an easy left. The reason why these are so important and why they're called left turn hardening or left turn calming is our human nature. If we're going down an intersection, let's say you're on this one as an example, if you're on Robinson Street and you're headed southbound, I guess for this direction, you'd be headed, southbound towards Maine, and then hang that quick turn. No, I still got that backwards. I will stop trying to remember my north and south when I'm looking at Maine and Carey. If you want to go north on Robinson and turn left and you see somebody coming at you, there's that human nature tendency to gun it before they get to the light. You want to beat that opposing driver to turn left. What that does is you're accelerating into a crosswalk across Main Street. So you're gunning it. You're being a little bit aggressive as another car is headed towards you because you want to beat the gap. The terrible outcome for anybody that's in the crosswalk is that they're in the crosswalk as you're accelerating. And so that's where a lot of dangerous near misses happen, but then also actual crashes happen in those circumstances. Sometimes it's a driver actually hitting a pedestrian in the crosswalk. Other times it's the car slams on its brakes and then another driver headed southbound can hit him. And so this type of treatment, this one actually is funded, but we're going to be doing this type of treatment on intersections citywide. Still at Main and Robinson that we've had on the book, so to speak, but these don't yet have budget behind them, is modernizing the traffic signal from span wire to mast arm. And that does a couple of things. Also with the curb extensions, the traffic signal modernization is important because it clears out all that extra junk at the ground level. You don't need so many poles holding up span wire. When we have storms where tree limbs are coming down, or even just the wires swinging with the weight of signals hanging from them, that stuff comes down in the storm. So when we upgrade signals from old mast wire or span wire to mast arm, not only is it longer lasting, but it also cleans up the ground area. The curb extensions, if you aren't familiar with curb extensions, it makes that corner larger, and most importantly, shortens the crossing distance for anybody. You're pushing a stroller across the street, instead of having to go that extra 8 or 10 feet on each side that used to just be pavement between you and a driver. Now you've got a protection of a lifted curb. Floyd Avenue and Robinson, same sort of thing, traffic signal modernization and curb extensions. Grove and Robinson, same traffic signal modernization and curb extensions. If you visualize, if you stand on Robinson, basically down by Cary, and you were to look northbound up the corridor, where we've all seen, pull, wire, and then all the other stuff down low, all of these projects clear that space out and tighten up the corners, which visually, from an architectural point of view, it keeps your eyes down lower, where we want human beings' eyes to be, especially when they're behind the wheel. We want people to look at other human beings and not up just at the red and green lights hanging in the sky. And then it also feels tighter. So as a driver, you're even more inclined to drive slowly through an area like this. And then as the people outside of cars, shorter crossing distances at each place. So Grove Avenue, Hanover, Stewart, Kensington had the curb extensions designed. Park and Robinson, same thing, modernizing the signal. Monument and Robinson, and then Grace and Robinson. All of these things had a lot of engineering analysis behind them to determine what could be done and what would be involved. Do the signals are they still necessary as is? Do they need timing adjustments? And does the equipment itself need to be upgraded? And some of these are, I forget if it's 40%, but some of these signals in this area are well over 40 years old, which in traffic signal life is quite old. So as a corridor, when we look at a list of things like this, the way I would encourage you to think about this whole street, this whole section of Robinson, is what could be done through this whole corridor that makes this street more delightful. I mean, there's such tremendous potential here. I mean, we've got heavy transit ridership through here. Of course, access east and west to lots of residential areas. We've got some commercial area. I mean, there's a lot that could be done to make it even more appealing of a corridor and more comfortable for people outside of their cars to enjoy. So that's what this list on the right-hand side is. Do you want me to pause there, or do you want me to go ahead and talk about this one intersection in particular, Kensington and Robinson?
Yeah, if you could, thank you for that. If you could get into the analysis that you did specifically at that intersection, and that speaks to some of the data that we see on the left-hand side. And then for folks that aren't familiar with that analysis that was done, I have that pulled up in another tab as well, where we can dig into some of the details if folks have questions throughout. And then we're also happy to share that under separate cover after the meeting if folks want to dig more into that. But and Councilwoman, I'm sorry, you were saying something as well.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
So I'll start at the lower section, crashes. So on Robinson Street, there was a pedestrian fatality a couple years ago. And I'll summarize what's here on the screen for those of you that might not be able to see the small print if you're looking at this on a phone. A driver was on Kensington, headed westbound towards Robinson, and turned left onto Robinson. And the report to police was, while turning left, there was sun glare through the windshield, and she didn't see the person crossing the street, hit him, and he unfortunately was killed. The police investigated that. Of course, any fatality they investigate, and no charges were filed. So turning left, sun glare, onto Robinson. So in response to that, we prepared a few options if what can be done with something like that. And so when you've got buildings that are really close to the corner, tight lines of sight, you can't just simply go in and remove buildings. So what could be done? And one option that could be done a couple of different ways is you could simply remove the ability to go westbound on Kensington to Robinson. So so nobody would drive that way. They would instead be one way, either for 1 block or for 2 blocks on Kensington. That is, I just want to be clear about that. That is not at all to say Public Works is pushing a project to convert that stretch of Kensington from 2 ways to 1 way. It's an opportunity if the neighbors want to explore that, if there's support among the neighborhood for that, and then also from Councilwoman, then the city would say, okay, if that's what you want, we would go ahead and do that. So that was dealing specifically with the one crash on Robinson Street. Speed. So anytime we look at these sorts of issues, the speed, like I said at the beginning, we're a Vision Zero city. Speed management is thing number 1. And so our speed data shows that 95% of people are driving 21 miles an hour or below. And that's on Kensington on either side. Robinson Street, 95% of people are driving 27 miles an hour or below. Average speed on Kensington is about 20, and average speed on Monument, just to give some perspective, or up near Monument, is 15 miles an hour, which probably doesn't surprise you because, coming in and out of the light up at Monument, between going over those cobblestones and just that tight corner, people tend to go much slower. But overall, we're seeing, this is from a speed management point of view, this is a very good situation to be in already. And then if these projects on the right-hand side were able to move forward, then we know that this would bring speeds down even a little bit more. As good as they already are, they could get even better.
Andy, just sorry to interrupt there. I know
Yeah.
that Rebecca was saying that she has a question, was not able to raise her hand, but I'm going to prompt you, Rebecca, to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy, for all of this. And so I am the president of the Fan District Association. I also live very near that intersection. I live a block from the Starbucks on Robinson, and I live on Stewart. So what I see happening, I mean, I appreciate that you are looking at Robinson in totality. What I am concerned about, as I'm going to assume the people who dialed in on this based on the title of this meeting, is specifically the intersection that has to do with the blinking light and the fact that the road angles and we lose our visibility. And the cluster of what happens at the intersection with Starbucks, I do believe, is a factor of what's going on a block up. So just because I see it every single day. So what I am hoping we get from this meeting is specifically, I appreciate what you're saying about people aren't speeding too much and that there's a lot of intentionality around things. But we've had 2 people die since I've lived here at that intersection. And there have been accidents and I've almost been hit, and Starbucks is a mess. So I am most concerned about the 2 intersections that are related at Stewart and Kensington because they are so close together. And what happens is people will leave Starbucks and then they'll zip out. And then the very next thing they're encountering is the flashing lights. So I appreciate everything that you've done here, but my focus and my concern are specifically those two intersections. So I am very interested in what we can do to either improve sight lines or impede speed and get a better understanding of what our options are or are not with regards to control at that intersection.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We know we all speed. I mean, even on Floyd Avenue where the speed limit is 20, we all see people that we know are going crazy fast. Even if I don't have a speed gun in my hand, I'll see somebody go by and think, was that 45 that they were just going through? Was it 50? I don't know, but it feels really fast. And then overall, I know that the data is saying that overall speeds are much lower. So but I certainly appreciate when you see, especially when you're at a particular corner, eyes on the street. It's super annoying when you see those violators, the extreme ones. For Stewart and Robinson, I think what you're seeing or what you're saying is exactly in line with what the city had put together as a hopeful project, upgrading the traffic signal there from the span wire to mast arm and those curb extensions. So those kinds of things, again, bringing in those corners to tighten things up, it helps in every which way. You've already got, thankfully, since you've got the light there, then you don't have to worry about sight distance from that point of view that you'll be given a signal to go. But the curb extensions make such a difference. I mean, even in areas where like Main and Cary through the fan, where people still drive too fast, even the modest speed reduction from the first set of curb extensions that went out was quite noticeable. And then at the moment, these are well into, I don't know if I'm trying to remember the percentage of design, but in the not too distant future, Main and Cary will be getting about 15 more curb extensions. And so that kind of thing, if we could do that at Stewart and Robinson, would be, and along with all these other intersections, that's the kind of thing that, especially in a street like Robinson, where you can see all the way up and down the street and be able to see all those corners, one tight one after another, it'd be really nice, because it would be so uncomfortable for people to drive fast. And in fact, they wouldn't want to drive fast. They would want to figure out what's going on here. I want to be here.
So, Andy, we have another question in the chat from Joseph Carlisle. Joseph, I'm going to prompt you to unmute to expand on that a little bit.
Hello, thank you guys. I was wondering if it's an option to just prevent traffic from crossing Robinson on Kensington. So you would stop left turns onto Kensington either way and just proceed straight through Robinson, north or south.
That's something that I would have to run by the fire marshal's office. But there are certainly engineering tools to do that sort of thing. In
bollards.
Fact, it could even be
flexi posts.
That's one. It could also be as simple as using the same material. And again, this is me spitballing, not saying that it would be allowed, but the same kind of material like we will be using for left turn hardening, which is often done when you want to calm streets in a way where you allow, say, bicycles to cross, but not cars to cross. Now, one reason why, just generally speaking, that's not a first resort is when you're in a city, you want to embrace the grid. One of the great things about a city structure, generally speaking, is that you have options. And so when planners and engineers talk about the bones of a city being good or bad, they're talking about the structure involving the street network. So that's in contrast to a suburban style design where everybody's expected and forced to use just the busy roads, you know, air quotes, busy roads or important roads. And so we don't, as a first resort, want to eliminate turning movements, but there are certainly times when that could be a thing. Like when we looked at this and said, you could simply not allow people to come up and turn left at Robinson. So whether that was converted as a one-way, or it was like what you're describing, and it's essentially, we would call that a right in, right out, where if you're coming up Robinson, you could turn right onto Kensington. And if you're coming westbound on Kensington, you could turn right onto Robinson northbound, but you would not be able to turn left. That's a possibility. I'll find out if that's doable. Philosophically, I think it probably is fine, because it's the same philosophy as looking into the one-way conversion that we did. Again, I mean, I would emphasize that's something that that the neighbors would need to like talk among yourselves. Is that something that we, the neighbors, want to pursue? What's the consensus among the neighbors? And then go from there.
Thanks.
Thanks, Joseph. And thanks, Andy. We have a couple of questions that get to, I think, probably the heart of what our office has heard the most over the last particularly 2 years, since we did have the tragic pedestrian fatality of a nearby neighbor. And that is essentially, why can't we, and why hasn't there been in the past, an all-way stop or a signal in particular in place here? And it's pointed out in the chat that this is the only intersection on Robinson between Cary and Monument that is not signalized. So Andy, can you speak to that?
Yes. Thanks for bringing that up, because I completely forgot to talk about this at the beginning. So one of the very first things that we do when we're doing any kind of intersection analysis is, or a safety evaluation, is we look at how an intersection operates today, and then what are the different options for how it could operate in the future. So operations being, it's a two-way stop, there's a four-way stop or all-way stop, or it's a roundabout, or it's a small neighborhood circle with just yield on each side, or it's a traffic signal. So it's the controls, and those are overseen or guided by federal law through the manual on uniform traffic controlled devices, MUTCD. And you'll sometimes hear us reference the MUTCD, and that's what that is. That's about the rules around how a thing operates. And so this intersection does not, what we call, warrant an all-way stop. It doesn't meet the criteria to have a stop sign on all four approaches. And the reason for that is the side street volumes. In this case, Robinson's the main street and Kensington's the side street. The side street volumes are just so low that people find gaps. And then as from a safety point of view, historically, there isn't anything that's suggesting that a stop sign would change behavior that would have prevented crashes. So one thing that we have to be very careful about with all-way stops. Last November, the US DOT updated that manual that guides when we can and can't use certain types of controls, whether it's two-way stop or all-way stop and signals. They updated it to be very clear with their language. It was like a smiling warning that they gave cities nationwide that said, always stops and yields shall not be used as speed control. And the reason why they did this was so many cities nationwide were coming from a good place of, we're trying to slow people down. How do we slow people down? Well, let's put in stop signs. That should do it. And what researchers found was when drivers get to a stop sign that they intuit is not necessary because they look around and there's never anybody coming from the side street. What that does is encourages people to roll through stop signs and just ignore them. And then what research has shown is not only do people ignore those stop signs that aren't warranted, but then their behavior gets worse at other stop signs and then even other red lights where they just, this bad behavior just seems to go on because they figure, well, all these stop signs are probably not necessary if that one is not necessary. So they put that warning out, and then along with that warning, they gave two things after they said you shall not use stop signs for speed control. They said, if you do, you open yourself up to tort liability, which of course would be ultimately a burden on taxpayers, but tort liability as in if there's a crash that occurs there and attorneys bring it before a judge and find out, well, this was put in but not warranted, then that city is going to open itself up to lawsuit risk. And then the other thing, the second warning that the US DOT gave was if you put in always stops that are not warranted, you risk getting any more federal funding. And that is huge for a city like Richmond, where the percentage of our work that does those projects that I listed at the beginning, and the about $700 million for Vision Zero projects, the vast majority of that is federal, state, regional money. Very little of that comes just from local dollars. So we absolutely need, I mean, I would call that a lifeline for the city of Richmond to be able to fund Vision Zero projects, safety projects through money. So through their money. So doing something like following the rules with when we can and can't use always stops and signals, I would say is critically important for us.
If I can just interject on that point for a moment, I understand the point you're making that this is not meant to be used to try and slow down traffic, but I don't think that's the point we're trying to make. And you've shown in the data that in general, people are, following the speed limit. What's happening here is it's dangerous because of the sight lines. So isn't that a different argument?
So the sightline, and you're talking about the westbound on Kensington as you approach Robinson, looking left.
Right. I think like these two acts, neither of the crashes were because of speed, correct? Like,
right.
I'm just wondering, like, we have two fatalities, regardless of whether or not the first driver was charged, right? I think they were driving under influence. And then the second driver was not charged. But I mean, the reality is we have two fatalities. We have numerous instances of near misses, near crashes. And I'm just wondering, does that not warrant, an intervention like a four-way stop or a four-way flashing stop like we have at Meadow and Grace? Thank you.
Thanks for asking the clarifying question. So I'll answer that backwards. In the four-way flashing is the same operationally as an always stop. So if we were to put blinking red lights for both directions, if that was to be the case, that would be the same thing as an always stop. And we know that an always stop is not warranted at Kensington and Robinson. The sight line goes back to why we put together that evaluation of what could be done that would eliminate that kind of crash in the future. That kind of, I'm looking left, like where you see on your screen now, where there's that truck there. And because the building's blocking, people typically, I mean, if you guys are over on that side of Kensington, you know this, you tend to roll to the end of the front end of the crosswalk and look over to see if anybody's coming, because you have to go pretty far up to see left before making a move. And so a way to get rid of that altogether is converting that to one way eastbound, so that there would be nobody that approaches Kensington and looks left. But the other thing, I think, as far as driver behavior goes, and you mentioned under the influence, I'll touch on that in a second. But as far as driver behavior as a whole goes on the Robinson corridor, that's why we look at all of these things in series, because they're all definitely related to each other. And then if we look at where the most need is, like where the most severe crashes are happening, the severe injuries and the fatalities, those are the places that we're trying to address first. And then we know when we address those, there's always going to be opportunity to make good intersections great intersections, or at least better than they are today. But our attention, like back to those early comments I was making about Vision Zero, is we've got to be focused on, as a primary point, where are people being hurt badly and dying because of speed, and how can we manage that speed, and then move from there. And the Robinson Street corridor is one of those that if you were to visualize that corridor with bump outs, just even as one measure, going up and down that street, that alone, I think, would make it, and I say this in a positive way, such a slow corridor. I mean, like you, I want all the streets in the fan to be crawling. I mean, not crawling with cars, but when cars are going through, I want them to be crawling.
So Andy, one question that was posed in the chat, or a comment that was posed in the chat, and sorry, y'all, I know I'm all over the place with my shared screen here, but I'm trying to provide some visual cues for folks. I know everybody here is very familiar with this intersection, but individual made the point that sight lines are also limited as you're coming eastbound as well, right? If you're a vehicle here, particularly looking north, that sight lines are pretty limited there as well. And so, that one-way conversion, I guess I'm wondering how that would address that issue as well.
So it's limited in the sense that it's not wide open, but it's not to the point where we go, where we have to take drastic or we're making recommendations for drastic measures. But that does, on the Kensington side, that doesn't impact the stop sign. That would be more like with Robinson, if you're struggling to see things on Robinson. But again, this is related, that question is related to what somebody had asked earlier about what about not allowing turns? Like, what if it was just simply right in, right out? So if this maneuver that we're looking at right now, if you were on Kensington and you were only allowed to turn right, there is enough sight line. If you were to come up today and look to your left, you can see far enough to then go ahead and turn right, southbound onto Robinson. So I will find out what's allowable as far as that goes.
Okay, thanks. And folks, I'm going to ask that we all are neighborly about this, and I'm going to take a leap of faith that we don't have any Zoom bombers on here, but it sounds like some folks were having issues with the raise hand function. So I am going to change the permissions to where you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. And I would just obviously ask that folks not speak over one another. But if you want to pose a question to Annie or just a comment, or Michaeline, I know that earlier you commented about your experience, your very real experience with this particular intersection. We would love to hear those comments. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to unmute yourselves.
I would be happy to talk about my accident I had at this intersection. Not a fatality accident. I didn't see any stats that were up about non-fatal crashes at this intersection, just the two that, I mean, I didn't see any numbers on the sheet that he had up before. So I'm just going to do a little retelling of what happened to me. So on 10/26/2023, which is almost 1 year ago, I ran out to grab diapers for my 4-month-old son while my husband was home with him. We had just moved into our fan home just a few weeks before. On my way home, I turned off a monument onto Robinson, driving towards Kensington. This quick trip was one I rarely took from my newborn. And luckily I didn't have him with me that day. And as I drove towards that intersection, someone who worked for RPS ran the stop sign at Kensington at full speed and T-boned my car and totaled it. And it was, I was very lucky. because I was not injured in this accident, and either was the other person. But my car spun around the front hood, landed on the concrete hitching post that's on the corner right there. I walked away without a scratch, but the car was totaled. So we had, if you're keeping up with the story, no car, a newborn, and just moved to a house. Had a lot going on. I'm not telling this to be over dramatic, but just to acknowledge the fact that everyone that lives in this city has a story, has a life, has things going on in their life. And I think when we can take an opportunity to make people's lives better and easier and eliminate unnecessary risk, that's something that we should do for everyone in our community. And I previously had the opportunity to be the president of the Uptown Civic Association in the 5th District. And I worked really hard to make a lot of infrastructure changes alongside Amy Robbins. And I know that we can make an intelligent change here. But I really do think that means a proper light, four-way stop. I think this is a confusing intersection for a lot of people. People stop at the stop signs or they're rolling forward. People aren't sure if they're supposed to be stopping, going up and down Robinson. There's just like not another real one-to-one intersection like this in the fan. So I think people that don't normally drive through this intersection are confused by it when they do come through it. So yeah, I would just love to see a positive change for not only drivers, but obviously pedestrians, because I agree with the bend in the road that creates a blind spot. And I would just say, I know you guys have done studies on this intersection, but literally have someone sit there for a day and just watch what happens at that intersection, because it is crazy. And it's very real, you know, like I still have to drive through that intersection like once a day, and I'm still worried someone's going to run the stop sign. So I hope we can make an intelligent change for the community. I have nephews that live on Kensington. I live on Shields. So I just hope we can move forward, because I know there's been a lot of trepidation with the city for this intersection for a long time.
Thanks, Michaeline. Andy,
Glad to hear you're okay.
Thank you.
And then I do see, thank you guys for using the hand raise function. I think I saw Mary Kate first and then Jason.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having this session today. I want to echo that I'm very glad you're okay, Michaeline. To one of the sentiments that you expressed here, you know, talking about having somebody sit out there for a day. I've lived in Richmond about 5 years. I've lived along or within a block of the Robinson corridor the entire 5 years I've lived here. And from 2020 to 2022, I lived in a second floor apartment in the 2500 block of Kensington, where I regularly had my windows open because it was the pandemic and I wanted some fresh air. And I am sorry that I cannot find the notebook where I took a tally, but I at one point turned to my boyfriend and said, how many times this week have we heard cars screech to a halt due to driver confusion about this intersection? And I know that it was at least once a week. And given that we were on the second floor, it was really the main noise we were hearing, aside from buses passing. And so I wish I had that data set to share with you all. But I know, as somebody who frequently walks along that corridor, as somebody who frequently bikes along that corridor, as somebody who takes regular public transportation, that for a lot of drivers coming to that intersection, especially those unfamiliar with it, as Michaeline, you said, there are not a lot of other intersections that look like this. And especially if folks are coming off Robinson from coming off 195 onto Robinson and taking that right turn. If all the green lights line up, it is easy to go faster, and it's also easy to become confused at this intersection with the yellow blinking light, to assume that everybody else coming to the intersection from the other directions thinks that it is a two-way stop and not a four-way stop. So with all of that said, my big question here, I do think a four-way stop sign is not necessarily going to, as you said, fix this problem. And with MUTDC or CD, I do understand that that's not possible. What I am curious about is there a reason that a traffic signal, like a stoplight, just a regular red, yellow, green stoplight, is there a reason that that would not be permissible at this intersection?
It's thanks for that. You sound like you've done homework. You know all the things behind it. So for the same reasons, that same guide describes whether a signal is warranted or not. And so we know that it's not. But to your point about the confusion of this intersection, this is something that we know well. And this goes to that list of projects about upgrading span wire signals. This, what you see, or I'm saying you, I was looking at my, I still had Google Street View open. I guess you guys don't see what I see, but I'm looking at the yellow blinking light on Robinson. That is the kind of thing that would not go in today. So if this intersection was to be upgraded from, like, if we were to call this a span wire upgrade here, all of that stuff that's up in the sky now would come out. My understanding is that decades ago that went in because people asked for something to show that from the Kensington side that there was a stop, and then from the Robinson side that you don't have to stop. And so that was the response. But if this span wire and those blinking lights weren't there, but for Kensington, it was very clear, this is a stop sign if you're approaching Robinson. And then on Robinson itself, along with these things we've been talking about earlier, the corridor as a whole had all of these treatments to keep it calm. This would just be an unsignalized intersection as you would continue either northbound or southbound. So that, I don't know if that, I know that's not what you want to hear, but I don't know if that helps describe the thing about the span wire and the confusion. That's, I mean, this is not something that would be done in modern day engineering.
I think you may have misheard the question though, Andy. I have heard you explain very clearly why a four-way stop sign is not permitted. I don't think I have yet heard you explain why a stop light is not permitted.
So we went through a warrant analysis to see, it's a similar set of steps, but just for a different outcome, whether or not a signal is appropriate. And it was not warranted. But if a signal, there's a different set of criteria for a signal, which I don't have in front of me. But if a signal were to go in at an intersection, at any intersection, one reason why there's so many steps involved in deciding if it's a good idea, if it's warranted and should be the next step, is that they're so outrageously expensive, both the design and the construction of them. We're talking like $750,000, something in that neighborhood. But it's also not the kind of thing that for this corridor that we would be starting at to say, do we want a light? Because from a safety point of view, our first thought is, how do we manage speeds? And then when we look at speeds and we see that 95% of the people are below 27 miles an hour, then we start looking at, okay, well, where are the severe injuries happening? For the most part, and then where are the fatalities happening? And so like the fatality that happened here, understanding what was involved there, can anything be done at that one? And then looking down at Main and Cary and seeing those as real hot spots. And so then when you're looking broader at calming driver behavior, instead of just at one particular point, I forget who mentioned it. Somebody mentioned coming off of an interstate. That's a very, very important point, is that when you're driving into a city off of a high-speed interstate, your body, your brain is still in this mode of, I'm going 60 miles an hour or however fast. And then when you get onto city streets, you've got to very quickly change that attitude or that mental state. And so looking at this as a whole system is really important from that point of view, and not just at this one particular intersection.
Thanks, Andy. And Brian, I appreciate you following up on the question to gain that additional clarity as to the answer. I do also want to just be cognizant that we are running a little bit low on time here, and we've got some folks that have raised their hand in the queue and or have asked questions in the chat that we're going to try to get to. So up next, Jason, I've got your hand raised.
Hi, yes. I have a question, and then my wife also has a question. So you had mentioned earlier that this this light had been installed to reduce confusion about this intersection. Actually, on the screen right now, you can see our apartment. It's that yellow building right there. And we listen to these near misses and crashes once a week, and watch people as they try to navigate through this intersection. They're unsure if it is a two-way or a four-way. People stop going on Robinson because they think it's a four-way. People breeze right through because they think it's a four-way, and they think they have the right of way. So with that in mind, and with the limitations in the budget and the limitations in the installations that can be put in here, what is an alternative to those to reduce the confusion with these signals, and to make this intersection safer? Because if we can't do a four-way stop, and this two-way stop's not working, and we can't do a traffic light, then it sounds like we don't really have much of an option left.
So I'm going to ask about what kind of costs and what the ramifications are for removing, if these were to be removed. And the blinking lights, I mean, that doesn't change the operation of the intersection. The intersection is still, it's a two-way stop intersection. And then I'm also gonna find out about that comment that I don't know if you were on the line earlier when we were talking about prohibiting left turns from Kensington, to see if that's something that's feasible.
I mean, there's even still, people were still going to, if you still don't make a left turn, you can still go straight through. And I observe people running through this intersection daily because they believe that it is a four-way stop when it is in fact not. Yeah. Also, my wife had a comment about it because she works from home and she hears a lot of this happening outside.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've been living on the corner of Robinson and Kensington for 15 years. And it wasn't until the last couple of years that I started working from home. And I know that the fatalities and the serious accidents are the ones that are recorded, but I hear them happen all the time at home. And I think that it's worth noting that just because it's a near miss doesn't mean that that's it's
a non-incident.
It's a non-incident. Yeah, I also just wanted to express that I fear crossing the street with my dog because you cannot see around that corner. And I worry about us being hit if my dog can't run fast enough. She's tiny and can't get to the other side of the road fast enough when a car is coming. I worry about when we park in front of our apartment building, somebody whipping around the corner and hitting me as I'm pulling out of my parking space. I just think that it's not just a matter of changing the behavior of the drivers, but even though pedestrians are not the ones at fault, like how are you going to change the behavior of pedestrians so that they are aware of the situation and can be more cautious about how they approach that intersection so that they are not, do not become victims of, a hit and run.
Yeah, I mean, all these concerns are good concerns. whatever the incident is that we see, that any of us see, whether it's speeding or it's property damage only crashes that are still a pain, because even if you don't go to the hospital, it's still a nightmare to deal with that sort of thing. All of this comes down to resources, and with anytime we have limited resources, then we have to prioritize. And so it's back to that Vision Zero mindset and the complete streets mindset of wanting to provide a network of streets citywide that serves all ages and abilities and serves all modes. And then also that we eliminate the severe injuries and fatalities. And so when we're looking citywide, I mean, again, it's about 9% of the streets where 76% of those things are happening. And there's so much that we've got to be doing that are on those roads. And that involves, even before it's money spent on design and infrastructure, it involves time just spending out in the field, talking with, it's involving fire, it's involving all the different groups, schools, to try to work on the worst of the streets first. And at the same time, we're getting about 1,000 requests per year that deal with speed management. That does not mean that 1,000 people have no real issue. It just means that as far as priorities go, we have to make judgment calls regularly about where do our resources need to go first. And then when we get those, when we take care of the ones where there are already people ending up in the hospital or worse, what can we do on those first, and then get to these other streets that fortunately don't have that same record and are, doing, they could always be better, but they're doing all right. So like, again, with the speed, I think that's really critical in this area, is that Robinson is overall speed wise in good shape. We want, like you said, we don't want anybody squealing their tires. We want everybody behaving well behind the wheel. We don't want there to be any fender benders or hit and runs. And we certainly want our most vulnerable users and their pets to be safe on city streets.
Andy, I just want to follow up on the second component of that last question, which was really good, and I think has been reflected in the chat a couple times as well. And that's the idea of, do we as a city track and incorporate that data into decision-making about traffic calming investments when it comes to either, I guess near misses would be hard to track, right? But crashes that are non-fatal or non-incapacitating, are those filtered into that formula?
Yes. And so as a matter of, well, it's not as simple as a formula, but yeah, so good point. Cause this is a specific example of how we take these things seriously and actually look to see, hey, if nobody was sent to the hospital for the last 3 years or 5 years, but a whole bunch of crashes happened. On our, I mentioned left turn calming or left turn hardening at the beginning of this meeting. One way, when we were looking at intersections citywide, when we got federal funding to be able to do this, we were looking at intersections every which way. We were looking at total volume entering, like how many cars per day are coming in to an intersection. We were looking at how many people are severely injured over a certain amount of time, fatalities, but then also just regular crashes. So there were some intersections that we saw that had very few over the years, very few severe injuries, but quite a few other types of crashes. And so when we look closer at those, we spotted some that were great candidates for left turn hardening or left turn calming, which again is that very simple treatment that makes a driver come almost to a stop so that they have to make a 90-degree left-hand turn rather than cutting at an angle. So we certainly are using that information, and it's not only tracked in spreadsheets, and we have that data it's publicly available too through Virginia keeps that, Virginia DMV. It's called TREADS. I'm blanking on the full breakdown of what that term stands for. But just because something is a property damage only crash does not mean it doesn't count. It just means it's not the same, like one-to-one, it's of course not the same as other types of crashes. But as a whole, when we're, again, this is, our work is citywide, and Vision Zero is a citywide program. We absolutely are trying to figure out how to overall protect people.
Thanks, Andy. Next up, we've got Bill. I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you a lot. And thank you everyone for doing this. I agree with all the comments that have been made, in particular, just how confusing that intersection is. I did 2 questions I'll try to be quick with. You mentioned, as I was hearing, that the intersection doesn't qualify for a traffic signal. I think maybe you said it's because of volume on Kensington. I live on 2605 Kensington, and I see an awful lot of traffic. So when was how old is the data on the volume of traffic on Kensington? First question. Second, anything that you're going to do is going to cost money. I see a lot of projects here all along, just Robinson corridor, unfunded, etc. How do we get this as a priority of a funding?
Good question. So the traffic signal, I want to say it was, well, the volumes would have been either 2022 or 2023 at the oldest. It's possible. Well, actually, no, this would have been the beginning of this year so probably 2023 volumes. Although it was my office that did that evaluation, I wasn't there for it at the time, so I can't give you specifics of the breakdown of that study. I just know that that it wasn't warranted. As far as the funding goes, council member would be much better equipped to describe the funding process as it's going on. But there are a few different ways that these things get put in pipelines. And typically for something that's big, like a traffic signal, when you're talking about $750,000, just order of magnitude, that's the kind of thing if it's a direct safety project, then sometimes we get federal safety money, where you apply for grants based on certain trends where you say the signal, here's how a signal would make this intersection safer. And then if you win that grant, then that money comes in, and several years later, you're able to spend that money. So like all the projects that I rattled off early in this call, those are things that were applied for funding several years ago and are just now coming, money in the bank from federal and state and regional pots of money. But the specific funding channels, that would be something for the other folks to chime in on.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. And while we're talking about funding for infrastructure upgrades like that, one of the questions that has come up in the chat in a couple different forms is, and I might get my terminology wrong here, Andy, I apologize, but essentially a pedestrian hybrid beacon, I think is what it's called, where you have essentially a pedestrian activated stop or flashing yield to indicate to drivers that there's a pedestrian about to cross, that a pedestrian can actually hit a button at ground level to be able to activate. Do we know sort of vis-a-vis a signal whether that would be allowable under PCD and the cost for that?
I don't have the cost for that offhand. They are pricey. It's incredible how much stuff that sort of thing costs. That's something that we do as a safety measure. This isn't the type of area that typically would benefit from something like that. As an example of one that on the top of my head is Cary at Commonwealth. That might be our most recent pedestrian hybrid beacon. I want to say Forest Hill Avenue, right outside of the park. So that's definitely one of the tools that we use in areas where people crossing are most at risk from motor vehicles.
So I guess if you could expand a little bit on its lack of fit here, is that mostly where you see larger roads with more lanes? Is that sort of the idea?
Yes, if you're walking across the street where there's 2 lanes in each direction, then just that sheer distance, that's an issue to begin with, makes it more challenging to get across. And then the other thing that does on a road that wide, typically people are inclined to drive faster. So we know, for example, Cary Street, out by Commonwealth, Cary is still an area where even when it narrows down a little bit, people tend to go fast. But especially when it widens out to 2 lanes, 2 lanes in the same direction. So that's usually where you see a pedestrian hybrid beacon going, where there aren't enough gaps for people to walk across the street in between cars. And people, if you're waiting, if you're a jogger, if you're just walking, if you're a parent pushing a stroller, if you're a dog walker, whatever, at some point you just get so aggravated that you take risks that are dangerous, and then you end up crossing, and then that's when the really scary stuff happens. So those are usually the contexts for something like a pedestrian hybrid beacon. Yeah, does that help?
I think that's helpful. And folks that have spoken to that in the chat, if you want to chime in verbally as well, feel free to do so. Andy, does it sound roughly correct? I want to say that the last time that I was aware of one of these being installed in the city was down on Broad Street, east of 14th, down by MCV, as you head down that hill. And I want to say that was about $500,000. Does that sound vaguely right?
It does, yes.
Okay.
I mean, if you think of it as a mini signal, but then when it comes to the price tag, you go, wait a second, that's not as mini as I would have hoped. Right. There's a lot involved in it that's essentially like a signal. But yeah, that's another good example, because there you've got, again, higher speeds, people going on Broad Street much faster than they should, either in a hurry to get to the interstate or just get down the Shaga Bottom. And so that's why on that corridor, pedestrian hybrid beacon went in.
Thanks, Andy. Mary Kate, I see your hand. And just a quick time check for folks. We are going to have to wrap up by 7:30. So I think we can definitely do a couple more questions, and then we can sort of talk about next steps and options that are available for moving forward. Mary Kate.
Thanks, Ben. This is just a silly question. And it's been a moment since I've been looking directly at the stop sign from the Kensington side of the intersection. Does it have something that says two-way stop directly under it? Because I know, like, some of our stop signs have something that, oh, it does. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Good questions. I like these traffic engineering questions. They hit me out of nowhere. Yeah, good stuff.
So I do just want to give a shout out. Somebody on Facebook did highlight for us. They weren't able to make it to the meeting tonight, that this pedestrian signage is actually hanging upside down right now, which maybe is a good metaphor for this whole intersection at this point, but is definitely something that we want to get fixed. And I believe has been logged into 311, so should be corrected. But Mary Kate, great question. And I can double check if that's also the case on this sign. Sorry for the vertigo here, but yep, it does look like it. Bill, I see you've got your hand raised as well. And then I do want to also get to some questions in the chat as well. Bill?
Yeah, thank you. But that last question triggered a second question, or third question, I guess I've got. What about, in addition to what you're looking at now, two-way stop, a little sign that says cross traffic does not stop? That wouldn't cost a whole lot of money, would it?
I'll check to see what that falls into, that what's allowable kind of sign. And then also, I mean, one thing that we are generally, I mean, not generally, we're always aware of is the types of things that are necessary versus the types of things that become distractions. And one thing, sometimes it's a fine line between necessary signs and then sign clutter. Because what we wouldn't want to have happen, this is probably too long of an answer for that one simple question, but we wouldn't want to have a neighborhood end up where every block, all the time, everywhere you go up and down Robinson, is just one sign after another, because people end up ignoring all the signs, or they overlook the important ones. But that's something that I can find out about as far as what's allowed. I saw something, or sorry, I won't turn into moderator. I'll hold my tongue. I'll make a mental note in case you don't see the comment that I saw pop up at the bottom of my screen.
Yeah, no worries. And then I do see that we did have a question from Kevin about whether, and I don't think that we did discuss this earlier in the meeting. He said he hopped on late, so wasn't sure if we had talked about it already, but I don't think we did. The idea of sort of a mini roundabout, what we see along Floyd as a right.
That's the one that I saw pop up. Yeah, he came on to speak my street design love language. So good question. We did not talk about it, and that's not something that we analyze, but that's I mean, this is the kind of thing that for everybody that doesn't know, so a traffic circle or a mini, well, I'll answer it in two different ways. One, if it was a traffic circle like what we see on Floyd Avenue, generally speaking, that means yield on all four approaches. I say generally, there are places where that's not necessarily the case, where there's still a stop sign on either side, and the island it's serving as an obstacle. And I use that word deliberately. It calms traffic even more because it's an obstacle. And it's beneficial in a neighborhood environment because it draws the eyes down. So from an architectural point of view, it gives your eyes something to look at closer to you than way out in the distance. And then they're generally flexible because they're not so large that, like a traditional roundabout, where you have to worry about the approaches to the intersection and that sort of thing. So that's my very long-winded way of saying we did not look at or get into this for this particular intersection. I think I would categorize that as like anything else, it comes down to a resources question. But I think that sort of thing, would fit in wonderfully with an overall, that list of projects of the streetscape improvements and the curb extensions and all that sort of thing. I think that's a great type of treatment.
Thanks, Andy. Kevin, did you have any follow-up comment or question on that one? And if
it says Rebecca just very great. Oh,
no,
sorry.
I'm here. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah. So I think, thanks for answering that. I think one of the things too is just, as we look at, I know, we've been experimenting, I'll say lighter, quicker, cheaper in some areas, to see the possibilities for testing something. And I think just, again, being close to this intersection, both from a, conflict point, but also, slowing generally on Robinson. I think, look, as an urban planner, I love the skewed streets and the vistas they create, but from a traffic perspective, right, it's much more difficult in terms of visibility. So I think, just putting it out there in terms of, I get in terms of warrants for signalization, the pedestrian signs have, long been plowed over and are gone. But I think in terms of just, the ability to slow, I think would be really helpful in that area. So just, I'd be interested in exploring more about that potential treatment.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. And did get a follow-up question on the traffic circle in particular. Andy, do we have, I know I'm throwing a lot of figures at you, or requests for figures. Do we have a sense off the top of your head what a treatment like this would cost to implement?
I don't have a good answer for that right now. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. All right. Happy to dig into that in terms of what the cost was in, I think it was 2018 or so when these were implemented, maybe earlier than that. And then I'm just going to go.
Probably 2015. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. And then I'll just multiply whatever that number is by like 5 now.
Construction costs have gotten outrageous in the last few years, no doubt.
But to Kevin's point about sort of lighter, quicker, cheaper, and what options we have for getting really creative about how we pursue implementation of some of these ideas and potential funding opportunities, I think that's a good opportunity for us to pivot to next steps and where we go from here. Councillor Jordan, did you want to get us started there?
Thank you. I will let you keep moving with that. I mean, I appreciate everyone, one, sharing their stories. I've had my own really tragic car crashes that have impacted my life to this day and will for the rest of my life. And obviously, Andy, you're doing a great job of explaining sort of the history and what the options are going forward. Kevin, I hadn't heard anyone bring forward the idea of a roundabout. I know we have seen some really good results from the ones that we have installed, but to, just to be fair, we also do get some pushbacks on particular ones, and that would require a lot more analysis. And then any of these things, we have to talk about the funding, which is, Sven, thank you for pushing us into the, okay, what's next? So I will let you walk us through what I think you have talked to the FDA, and you've also talked to Andy further on some of these. But yeah, if you could recap that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, Andy, I do want to give you an opportunity just to, you've been very generous with your time tonight. We really do appreciate it. And as a neighbor, as a fellow fan resident, would love to just hear a little bit of your response really to sort of the totality of things that you've heard tonight, understanding that you are one incredible public servant in a larger department, in a larger city framework. But if you have just sort of a general sense of what you've heard tonight and what you think may be possible in terms of next steps.
My immediate response to everything is, I would love it if all public meetings were full of folks like you guys who think of the person outside of a motor vehicle as the most important person in the world. Because I tell you what, public projects would be so much easier. Street reorganizations, speed management, automated enforcement, education campaigns, all these kinds of things would be they would move so much faster if the rest of Richmond's residents were as motivated as you guys. So I appreciate everything. Next steps, I mean, my list of that is very short. I mean, I had the few things that we chatted about that I'm gonna get back to Sven about. But yeah, other than that, thank you all for having Thursday night happy hour with me.
And likewise. So to speak a little bit to some of our funding options and some of the options before council, I think we talked a lot tonight about MUTCD guidance, right? And what that lays out as far as options for traffic safety controls on our streets and what DPW can generally support. And then obviously we need to look at the prioritization of those interventions given the high injury network and given where we're seeing the most need throughout the city. But council does also maintain the ability to legislate some traffic interventions as well. Councillor Jordan has legislated exactly one in the entire district in the last 3.5 years, and that was actually approximate to this area at Grove and Stafford, the always stop sign there. But it is something that we try to not do, and for good reason, right? We want to work with and listen to the expert advice that we get from DPW about what works. We also want to understand that anytime that we're assigning resources to an intersection or an area that is outside of the high injury network in particular, that we are diverting resources away from those solutions. We also understand that Robinson is on the high injury network, right? And that we have had, as we've heard tonight, multiple tragic events take place in proximity to this intersection. So not only is an always stop something that council can legislate, but also speed tables is something that we have seen council legislate as well. Again, if we were to legislate any of those things, we need to understand where that funding is coming from. And so I really appreciate the time that Rebecca has taken as president of the Fan District Association, and having had conversations with her and the Fan District Association board as well about whether there's an opportunity to partner to help fund things like speed tables, which are not cheap, but they are cheaper than a signal, and utilize some of the parking revenues that the Fan District accrues every year and is allowed by city ordinance to spend on public safety investments. So that is not saying that a decision has been made one way or another, but those are some creative funding options that are on the table, as well as what Director Vonk referenced earlier with our Lighter, Quicker, Cheaper program, which is sort of new as of this past year, and is an outgrowth of the Richmond Connects multimodal plan to be able to implement things that are lighter, quicker, and cheaper, like paint in the road to help draw visual interest and slow folks down, flex posts to be able to model what things like a curb bump out would look like, and again, force people to slow down, force people to avoid pedestrians. So that program is another option that we can look at. And then thirdly, and this is also new, this is the first year where we are going to be incorporating participatory budgeting into our fiscal year 2026 budget. And so what that means is that second district residents will be able to vote directly on $200,000 worth of capital improvement project funding across the district. Understanding that, as you saw on that high injury street network map, there are a lot of different areas of need throughout the district. This could be one of those areas that rises to the top for that money. And that money can go towards any of the different treatments that we talked about tonight, or others that we haven't talked about yet. So it is expensive. We do have guardrails and guidelines we need to follow, but there are both legislative options that council can take, and there are creative funding mechanisms that we can utilize to get there. And we want to make sure that when we do that, we are working with neighbors, working with the community, working with Andy and DPW to find where that consensus is. And that is the work that we're going to be doing coming out of this meeting, and have been doing and informed this meeting in the first place, but we'll be doing going forward to try to come to a solution. Councilwoman, any additional comments to that?
No, I really appreciate that summary. And we're also, moving into budget season where our office will be formulating our budget for next year, not knowing who the next mayor will be, but putting that together. And when we do that budget, it's based on things that we hear from constituents. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here tonight. We have a little bit more, I would say, feedback we need from DPW on some of the alternatives we talked about. And again, I just really appreciate people keeping the momentum on this intersection and on this street in particular.
Yep, and as a reminder, this is all recorded for the folks that weren't able to join us tonight. I know lots of other folks are interested in this intersection. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel. I did just drop a link in the chat for the participatory budgeting page where you can find more information on how you can participate and submit ideas. And expect for this to not be the last communication from our office about this intersection and how we move forward. So thank you, everybody, for your time. And Andy in particular, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me. I almost made it to 7:30 without talking about bike lanes. That'll be next.
We'll talk to you about those too.
Okay, that's another 3 hours.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And I feel very encouraged by this conversation. So to be continued.
Yep. Thanks, y'all. Have a great and stay safe.